Hello and welcome to Go For It. I am your host, Paul Gannon. For the next hour, we're going to be talking sports and having fun doing it. I want all your ideas, all your opinions, and all your beliefs. And of course, as always, you will get a heavy dose of my opinion. So we got a lot to talk about in this next hour, a lot to get to. We're going to touch on James Harden, where he's going to go next. What's the possibility? Could it be Philadelphia? Could it be Brooklyn? Could it be Milwaukee? Or does he stay in Houston? So we'll talk all about that in terms of James Harden. Also, we got to touch on Logan Paul and Floyd Mayweather Jr. That is a fight that is going to happen February 20th. It was announced last Sunday, February 20th. Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Logan Paul will be getting it on. We'll be getting it on in the ring. Exhibition bout, of course. Therefore, it is not real. But there's a possibility that's going to happen February 20th. Not a possibility. It's announced, but who knows what's going to happen if it actually goes through. But it's announced in February 20th, Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather Jr. So we'll talk about that. Carson Wentz, Jalen Hurts. We got to get to that as well. I mean, you got the situation out there in Philadelphia. They made a change at the quarterback position, and they weren't going with their second-round draft pick, and Jalen Hurts. So we'll talk about that as well. So a lot to get to in this hour, and we're going to go get it. Let's do it. So we have to start with the situation with James Harden. And we know the whole situation with James Harden. We're trying to figure out, where will James Harden land? Where will James Harden go? Will he stay in Houston? Will he go to Philadelphia? Will he go to Milwaukee? Where will James Harden go? We have to figure that part out. We're not sure at this point. There's a lot of different destinations out there, a lot of different destinations on the table at this point. And you know, you heard talk Milwaukee was maybe a preferred destination. You heard talk that Brooklyn was a preferred destination. You heard talk that Philadelphia was a preferred destination. So at the end of the day, James Harden wants to go where he can obviously win a championship. And as the way Houston's presently constructed, with Wall, with Harden, with Cousins, and the rest of those guys there in Houston, they're not set up to win a championship. Houston, the way they're presently constructed, cannot win a championship. That is not a championship-ready team in Houston at this point in time. They're not. Not good enough, not a good basketball team. I wouldn't say not a good basketball. Let me take that back. They're not championship caliber. Probably a playoff team, but not championship caliber. So that is something that obviously, you know, James Harden, and there's also been talk about ownership and, you know, ownership's love for Donald Trump and how that has rubbed James Harden the wrong way. I don't know how true that is, but at the end of the day, James Harden allegedly, apparently wants out. The Rockets seem content on keeping him, apparently, according to Mark Stein. New York Times covered the league for a long time. So who knows where that's going to go. But when I look at James Harden, to me, if James Harden wants to win an NBA title, I think his best chances is to leave Houston. And I look at, you know, a bunch of different destinations. Obviously, Brooklyn is a destination. Obviously, you could team him up with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. And that would be a good destination for James Harden if he chose to go that route. Good destination. Brooklyn's a team that is prepared to win now, prepared to win a championship right now. Philadelphia, another team that is prepared and poised to win right now. Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and you would wonder if they have to give up Ben Simmons to get James Harden, but who knows at this point. But again, that would be a destination for James Harden and a good destination for James Harden in terms of wanting to win a championship. The Milwaukee Bucks, again, obviously, if the Bucks decide to make a move and bring James Harden in, again, that team is a championship caliber team with James Harden. So I look at all those three situations, and I'm, you know, you're hearing various things. Some people say, well, the Sixers can find a way to get James Harden without giving up Ben Simmons and things of that nature. Let's just stay with the Sixers now. Let's just say, hypothetically speaking, the Sixers find a way to get James Harden without giving up Ben Simmons. That would be absolutely amazing if they could do something like that. But hypothetically speaking, what if they did and you teamed the Ben Simmons and the James Harden and Joel Embiid together? That, to me, is a championship caliber team right then and there. Embiid, Simmons, and Harden, that's a championship caliber team. That's a big-time big three. That's a tough team to beat. Now, I can't see how the Sixers could acquire. I can see it, but I can't see how, if you're Houston, how you would give up James Harden and not get Ben Simmons back. I don't know. I mean, obviously, you would have to do a deal around it. Tobias Harris. Tobias Harris makes a lot of money, has that $181 million contract. So obviously, we'd be centered around Tobias Harris and a couple others, and obviously a bunch of picks. But I don't know if you're Houston how you could make a deal that you get rid of James Harden and not get Ben Simmons back in any type of deal with James Harden for James Harden. That would be a mistake. That would be, I don't know how you do it. And I don't think they can do it. And I don't think they won't do it. I don't think they'll do it. But, you look at it, the Sixers seem to be reluctant to give up Ben Simmons in this particular situation. And you can understand that. Ben Simmons is an all-star, can do a lot of different things, defend, obviously a big-time distributor, can score. Obviously, not a big-time shooter, but he can score. He can get his points. He gets his points. He does what he needs to do. He's a do-it-all type of guy. But if you look at the situation with the Philadelphia 76ers, obviously a James Harden and Embiid situation probably is better than a Simmons and Embiid situation. But the thing about it is James Harden is 32, Ben Simmons is 25. So, you got to look at it from that standpoint as well, but also look at it from this standpoint. How long can we look at Joel Embiid. Can he stay healthy enough, long enough for Philadelphia to have the success that they want? And I look at it from this standpoint. The window, being that you have Joel Embiid, the window, I think, is closed. Not closed, but it's not a large and wide window in terms of how long you got, because you never know what's going to happen in terms of Embiid. And he stayed fairly healthy over the years, but you don't know what's going to happen in terms of the injuries and whether or not that will limit him from being the player that he needs to be and limit him from being available. So that's something to think about if you're the Philadelphia 76ers. So I think that the iron is hot now. And I think they have to do any and everything to try to win a championship right now. They have to do it. They have to do any and everything to win a championship at this point in time. If they can do that, if they can bring a James Harden in, obviously you have an opportunity to win it now. But again, if you can find a way to bring James Harden in without giving up Ben Simmons and teaming up Harden, Simmons, and Embiid, it would be amazing, because here's the thing the Sixers need. They need an elite player off the dribble, elite scorer off the dribble. They need an elite scorer off the dribble. They need it. And if you look at the Sixers, to me, when they were at their best, Simmons, Embiid, and Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler was that elite guy off the dribble that was able to score for the Philadelphia 76ers. If they found a way to get James Harden without giving up Ben Simmons, I think would be an absolute miracle. But if they find a way to do it, and you team those three, Harden would be that elite guy off the dribble that would help a Ben Simmons, that would help a James Harden. So to me, if that is the move and the Sixers find a way to if the Sixers get James Harden without giving up Ben Simmons, they're championship contenders. I think they're in the mix at this point, but I think most definitely this is a championship caliber team if they get James Harden in here. Whether it's with Ben Simmons or without Ben Simmons, but if they get James Harden with Ben Simmons, championship caliber. This is a tough team to beat. And to me, the Rockets, I said this before, the Rockets, it would make a lot of sense to make sure that you get a Ben Simmons back in this deal, because Ben Simmons at that point would have, I wouldn't say his own team at that point, but the team would be centered around what he does best. And that's going downhill. You wouldn't have him be their clock in the middle. You would have Simmons being able to go downhill and be able to do the things that he likes to do. So I said this before, the fit between Simmons and Embiid is a little funky. But I think what they've done at this point, the pieces they added around, whether it's Danny Green, whether it's Seth Curry, I think that helps. Those pieces, guys that can shoot, that can stretch the floor, that helps Philadelphia big time. Helps them big time. But I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if that is enough. It's good. It's an upgrade, but isn't enough to win an NBA title. And that's the question the Sixers have to ask themselves, as they go throughout the course of this season. And that's a decision that Daryl Morey has to make in terms of whether or not what they have together is good enough. But we'll see what happens. Maybe he goes to Milwaukee. And if he goes to Milwaukee, again, Milwaukee's another team in some respect that needs a guy that can do some things elite off the dribble. And I know you have Giannis, but we've seen Giannis over the years in the playoffs struggle. He struggled in the playoffs. He wasn't the same as he was in the regular season. He wasn't doing the things that he does in the regular season come playoff time because the game slows down. It's a half-court game, and his inability to shoot. And so when it comes to Giannis, everything to the cup, everything to the cup, everything to the cup. And ultimately, he broke down his ankle. It broke down. So they could use a James Harden, a guy who is elite off the dribble, who can take those big-time shots for you, who can hit those big-time shots for you. So he would be good in Milwaukee. Obviously, Brooklyn, that would be a great location for him as well. But and again, those three teams, Milwaukee, Philly, and Brooklyn, if he went to those three teams, those teams could be one of the favorites at that point if he goes to one of those three. If he stays in Houston, his chances of winning the championship, I don't think he has one. Unless they make some kind of major moves, I don't think they have one. He has one. I mean, you did add a Christian Wood. You traded Westbrook for John Wall. I mean, Wall is more of a traditional point guard than Westbrook. But at the same time, Wall is coming off all these major injuries. He is only 30 years old, so he's younger than Westbrook. But again, coming off all these major injuries, you wonder what Wall has to offer. And I think he'll be fine, but you always have the question in the back of your head. He's coming off an Achilles injury, and we know what happens with guys that come off Achilles injuries. They ain't always the same. So something to think about when it comes to John Wall out there in Houston. So we'll see what the Rockets do at this point. Mark Stein is saying Houston is content with keeping James Harden, but we know James Harden did hold out, and we know James Harden, reportedly wants to be traded. So how they figure those things out and what they do with that should be interesting. Let's go to Philadelphia now. Let's stay in Philadelphia now and go with the Philadelphia Eagles at this point. I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles have finally made the move. They finally moved off of Carson Wentz, and they're going to their second-round pick, Jalen Hurts. Now, you look at the situation now with Philadelphia. This is a team obviously that is struggling. 3-8-1, struggling. So it's been a struggle for the Philadelphia Eagles at this point in time. Not a very good football team, fortunately for them. They're playing the NFC East, but that at this point doesn't really matter if you can't win games. And Philadelphia is having a hard time winning games. And because they're having a hard time winning games, and because they're doing absolutely, positively nothing on the offensive side of the ball, they made a decision. They made a choice, and they decided that, the best way to go for this team is to go to the rookie, Jalen Hurts. Now, whether Jalen Hurts is ready to do anything on the football field at this point in time is, something we'll have to see play out. But I will say this. Carson Wentz is giving you nothing over the past few weeks. It's giving you absolutely nothing. He's been a turnover machine. I mean, he can't get out of the way of sacks, and that's not all his fault. But it's been a struggle for Carson Wentz. So the Eagles had to make a choice. They had to make a decision, and they had to make a change. It's that simple. Jalen Hurts came in last week against the Green Bay Packers, brought him back into the game. You could argue, well, the Packers were playing a little soft on defense. Let's see what happens now with Jalen Hurts against his number one New Orleans defense. And this is going to be a true and tough test for Jalen Hurts, going up against that Saints defense, the number one Saints defense. That's going to be a tough situation for Jalen Hurts, and him going out there and being able to do what he has to do and have success against that Saints defense. It's going to be tough. But I think at the end of the day, you had to do it. Carson Wentz didn't give you nothing. And the question becomes now, what do you do with Carson Wentz? I say this. I'm not ready to give up on Carson Wentz at this point in time. I'm not giving up on Carson Wentz at this point in time because I think Carson Wentz still has a lot to offer. I think Carson Wentz still has a lot to offer. You can look at all these other years with Carson Wentz. 2017, that's the magical season, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 2018, 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 2019, 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So the guy has put up numbers. This season is the only thing that kind of stands out like a sore thumb. It's an outlier. It doesn't show who he is. 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. 27 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. That's the past 3 years for Carson Wentz. That, to me, more aligns to what he is as a quarterback than what I see this season. I don't know what is going on with Carson Wentz. Is he hurting? Nothing out there about that. Is he hurting mentally? After this Philadelphia Eagles decided to draft Jalen Hurts in the second round, did that do something to his mental? Did that affect his mental? Carson Wentz says no. Of course he's going to say no. I don't think that's something you're going to come out and admit and say, you know what? Mentally, I'm not right because they chose Jalen Hurts. That's not something you do. That's probably not something you say. But I look at the situation, and did it make sense on the surface to draft a quarterback in the second round after you just gave Carson Wentz a 4-year, $128 million extension in 2019? Did it make sense? Like, we look at the situation with the Green Bay Packers, right? They drafted a quarterback in the first round, Jordan Love, right? And drafting him, Aaron Rodgers is up there at this point. So that made sense from my standpoint in terms of age. Aaron Rodgers can't play forever, and he's getting older. So if you're the Green Bay Packers, you got to look at tomorrow, and you got to focus on tomorrow on some level. Aaron Rodgers is 37 years old, still playing at an elite level, but at the same time, you have to get somebody in the pipeline because you don't know how long Aaron Rodgers is going to go. He might go for a while. He may not. But it's a good chance at this point it seems like he will. He's playing at an elite level still. But at the same time, you needed someone in the pipeline. So that's different. He's 37. That's different. Carson Wentz is 27, in his prime, signing a new deal, new contract, has a new contract, all those things. And you say to yourself, why would you make that move when you got a guy already there? And you would think if you're the Eagles, well, you would do something to help Carson Wentz. Get him an offensive lineman of some sort. Get him another receiver of some sort. Or maybe on the defensive side of the ball, get another corner. Get a linebacker. Because Philadelphia, those are places they need help in terms of the offensive line. You need help there. Carson Wentz has been sacked a bunch of times. You need help there. Wide receiver position, you need some help there. Linebacker position, you need some help there. Corner position, you need help there. So you need help in these certain areas. But you decided that Howie Roseman wanted to make a quarterback factory or said that the Eagles, Philadelphia is a quarterback factory, and he chose Jalen Hurts. Now, it's clear to me, Jalen Hurts isn't a Taysom Hill type. We've seen him come on and do the Wildcat and things of that nature, but Taysom Hill's a big dude. Hurts is more of a traditional quarterback than Taysom Hill. And we see Taysom Hill out there playing some big-time football, for the New Orleans Saints at this point. But still, it didn't make sense. So my thing, obvious to me, that on some level, it could be a couple of things. Did you draft Jalen Hurts because you wanted to make sure you had a competent backup for Carson Wentz? Because we saw last year in the playoffs against Seattle, Carson Wentz went down with a concussion, and ultimately it cost Philadelphia that game. I think if Wentz stays in that game, they beat the Seahawks last year in the playoffs. Just my opinion. But, if they had a competent backup, maybe something different happens. We know what happened in 2017. Carson Wentz had a big-time year, put up some big-time numbers, did some big-time things. But ultimately, he went down in Week 13 against the Rams, ripped up his knee, and Nick Foles finished it out, ultimately won a Super Bowl. Rest is history. So we know that. We know that story. We've seen that story. We heard that story numerous times. But at this point, obviously you drafted Hurts because maybe you don't necessarily believe that Carson Wentz is your guy. Maybe you believe that there's some slippage. Maybe you believe he's just not as good as he was in 2017. It will never be that good again. Maybe that's what you believe. I don't know. But it's clear that they believe something. And it's clear that they believe that Jalen Hurts could be something. What he will be should be interesting. Now, if you're Philadelphia, what do? Let's just say Jalen Hurts comes out here, right? Let's just say they run the table. Let's say Philadelphia wins the next 4 games. Jalen Hurts is playing some big-time football, putting up some big-time numbers, and they win all 4 of those games. Let's just say that happens. What do you do if you're the Eagles? You're pretty much looking at Carson Wentz's contract you're pretty much stuck with Wentz. This season, obviously, next season. 2022 is the time you can get out, right, without a significant cap hit. That's when you can get out of that deal 2022. So you're pretty much stuck with him next year as well. So what do you do if Jalen Hurts balls out? Do you come back the following year and have an open competition between Wentz and Hurts? Is that what you do? I mean, what do you do? And I think the Philadelphia Eagles messed this up by bringing Jalen Hurts in. I wasn't high on Jalen Hurts. I wasn't high on the guy. I wasn't. And I still believe that Carson Wentz still can be a very good quarterback in this league. I think 2017 proved it, and I think the other 2 seasons proved it. I think he still can be a very good quarterback in this league. Whatever happened this year is what's happening. But we've seen quarterbacks have bad years. I saw a graphic somewhere. I wish I remembered it, but it was the 5th year for certain quarterbacks. It was Donovan McNabb, his 5th year, his numbers were pedestrian. Ben Roethlisberger, his 5th year, his numbers were pedestrian as well. So, like, quarterbacks have bad years. People have bad years. You have off years. Every year is not going to be great. Every year is not going to be special. So you're going to have moments, years sometimes where you're just not that good. And I think Carson Wentz is having that year where he's just not that good. But that doesn't mean he's not good. He's just having a moment in a time. Now, the Eagles have to figure out whether this is just a moment in time, or is this, who he is as a quarterback? Because the Eagles, at this point, if they continue to struggle, could have a top 10, top 5 pick. And so at that point, you have to make a decision. If, I don't think of Trevor Lawrence, if he comes out, is falling. Let's say Justin Fields falls to 3. Let's say you're at 3, and Justin Fields falls to 3, and you're there. If you're the Eagles, do you take him at that spot? Because you took Jalen Hurts with a 2nd-round pick. You got Carson Wentz there also. What do? I mean, you're our quarterback factory. That's what you tell us. So what do you do in that instance? What do you do in that situation? It's something they have to decide. It's something Philadelphia has to decide as a team, as a franchise. But I think drafting Jalen Hurts has opened up a can of worms, has opened up some things, and they got to figure out whether or not, what is what. They have to figure out what is what and determine whether or not, is Carson Wentz our guy moving forward? Is Jalen Hurts our guys moving forward? I don't think they know. They don't know at this point. And whether they'll find out, it's going to be, we'll have to see in time. But at this point, they don't know. And it's clear they don't know. It's clear. It's very clear that they don't know at this point what is what. I know Doug Peterson said, he still believes Carson Wentz can be an exceptional quarterback in this league. I agree with you, Doug. You are correct in that. But, to what extent, who knows? But Philadelphia has to figure this thing out. It looks like in terms of the NFC East, it might come down to the Giants and the Washington football team. I mean, both teams that went into, some hostile environments. I know there's no crowd there, so the environment is not as hostile as it could be or should be or would be. But, they did go, you got Washington who went into Pittsburgh, beat the undefeated Steelers. Steelers are 11-0. Washington went in there down 14-0 and came back and got the victory. You got the Giants who went out to Seattle. Seattle, a very good football team. 8-3 coming into that game, I believe, and a team, one of the better teams in the NFC. Giants go into their building, go into Seattle and get the victory. So it looks like, it appears that Washington and New York are the 2 teams in the NFC East that are going to battle it out in the next few weeks for the division. I still give the Philadelphia Eagles an outside shot. And I'll tell you why. I think, Washington's schedule isn't easy and New York's schedule isn't easy. I look at the Giants. They got Arizona this week. They got Cleveland. And they've also got Baltimore in the next 3 weeks. So the Giants, in the next 3 weeks, their schedule is brutal. They easily could lose all 3 of those games. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. This division isn't over just yet, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's looking, again, like it's going to be Washington and New York battling it out. And you had to give New York the edge because New York beat Washington twice. So if those teams were to tie, it would go to New York due to the tiebreaker, due to New York beating Washington twice. But if I look at the NFC East and I look at, the Giants, again, their schedule is brutal. They could easily lose the next 3 games. And I say that, well, you could say, well, Paul, Arizona's not playing the greatest of football. They're 6-6, and the Giants are 5-7. And Arizona's going to New York to face the Giants. So you could say, well, Paul, that's not Arizona. What makes Arizona better than New York? Arizona, both teams need the game, but I think Arizona is a slightly better team. And because Arizona is a slightly better team and they need the game more, they're going to win that football game. Following week, the Giants play the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns playing some good football right now. 9-3, playing some decent football. It is in New York, but I think Cleveland wins that. And then they go to Baltimore and play the Ravens, and the Ravens are fighting for their playoff lives. So I think they lose that. So I think New York could easily win the next 3 games. So if New York loses the next 3 games, that puts Philadelphia in position, right? And you look at Washington, and you look at Washington's schedule, and Washington's schedule, again, is a tough schedule as well. Washington doesn't have an easy road home. They don't. And I know they went into Pittsburgh and beat the Steelers, but again, the Steelers, even before that, weren't playing that great of football. They weren't playing great football in Pittsburgh. But even though they were winning, you look at them the week before, they played the Ravens with RG3, and they weren't really that good in that particular game. They got the victory, but they really weren't that good. So the Steelers have been struggling. But let's throw Washington's schedule up here. We look at Washington's schedule, and it's not an easy schedule. At San Francisco, who's been playing better football, they host Seattle, they host Carolina, and then they go to Philadelphia. I think Washington easily could lose 3 of the next 4. They could lose to San Francisco easily. They're going to lose to Seattle, and they easily could lose to Carolina and Philadelphia. So I think Washington could easily lose 3 out of the next 4 games. So that now comes to the Eagles and what the Eagles can do in terms of turning things around with them and getting themselves back on track. Well, Philadelphia can win, and this could be a stretch, but if Philadelphia can win 3 out of the next 4, which is not out of the realm of possibility, they easily could win the NFC East because of that tie. Let's get this schedule up here for the Eagles. Eagles, 3-8, 3-8, 3-8-1 at this point, but they have New Orleans. It's going to be a tough one. It is New Orleans outside the dome, so maybe it's an opportunity, but that's going to be a tough one. They have Arizona. They got to travel to Arizona. It's winnable. It's not out of the realm of possibility they beat Arizona. Then they got at Dallas, who's struggling right now. And they're Washington at home, who, how good is Washington at this point? I wanted to say the Redskins, but, we know they're the Washington football team. It's just, you're just used to it as habit. So, again, Philadelphia easily can win 3 of the next 4 and finish the season at 6-9-1 and win the division. It's that simple. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Will it happen? Who knows? But Philadelphia is not done. And, at this point, they have to play better football, and we'll see if they can play better football with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback. Time will tell. We'll see what happens with the Philadelphia Eagles moving forward. But, they have a decision to make, and it's going to be interesting what they do with Carson Wentz moving forward, but that's going to be interesting. Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather has, joined the exhibition circuit, if you will. We saw the success of Tyson and Roy Jones. We saw that success, over 1 million pay-per-view buys. And I'm looking and hearing about Errol Spence and Danny Garcia, and they've done possibly around 250,000. So these are 2 guys, 2 fairly elite guys in the sport of boxing, and they can't do as much as Mike Tyson and Roy Jones, who are way past their prime. So that's troubling. That's an issue. That's a situation that we need to look at. Boxing might have a problem And the reality of it is, and I said this earlier this week on the Chris Williams podcast. Make sure you check that out. iTunes there, so check it out. But I said this earlier this week. Look, if the Big Three is outrating the NBA has a problem. So if Tyson Jones is getting more pay-per-view buys than Spence-Garcia, boxing has a problem. They have a problem. And they have to figure this problem out. Now, boxing isn't going anywhere. The sport has a lot of warts. The sport has a lot of issues. The sport has a lot of problems. But it isn't going anywhere. When the event is big and like, Mayweather-Pacquiao, it was Super Bowl-esque. Everybody and their mama watched it. Whether you paid for it on your own or whether you went to somebody's house. And whether you went to the movie theater or maybe you went to a bar. But everybody was watching. It was the talk of the town. It was the talk of the sports world. That was the talk of the sports world. So when they do it big, right? Tyson Jones. I know they're retired guys and I know they're 50-year-old guys. But again, people were talking about it. It was the talk of the night. It was the talk of the night. And, now you got Mayweather and Logan Paul. It's a fight, exhibition fight. I mean, Floyd Mayweather, we always want to see Floyd in the ring. And Logan Paul, who's a YouTube sensation, who the kids love. He's popular. The Paul brothers, they, as crazy and maybe even as sad as it sounds, the Paul brothers could be the cash cow of the sport of boxing. Those two guys could be the cash cow of the sport. Logan and Jake Paul could be the cash cows of boxing. Guys who aren't really boxers easily could be the cash cow of the sport. And that's, dare I say, an issue. That's an issue. It's an issue, right? It's an issue. And boxing has a problem. And it could be a situation where, like, if you're Tank Davis, right, and you have an opportunity to fight Logan Paul or Jake Paul, and with minimal risk, you have an opportunity to fight the Paul brothers with minimal risk, you're probably going to take that fight. You're probably going to take that fight. So let's look at, we look at Logan Paul. I mean, 5.8 million followers on Twitter. He's popular. People care about Logan Paul. Let's look at Floyd Mayweather and his Twitter account. How many followers does Floyd Mayweather have? 7.9. So this is the GOAT, one of maybe the most popular boxer in this era of boxing, and he has 7.9 million. Logan Paul has 5.8. What about Jake Paul? Let's look at Jake Paul and how many followers he has on Twitter. I mean, these guys, people care about the Paul brothers, right? They care about the Paul brothers. They care about what they bring to the table. People care. All right? Jake has 3.8 million followers. So Floyd has 5.8. Logan has 5.8. Jake has 3.8. Floyd has 7.9. But let's look at other people in the sport of boxing, right? Errol Spence, maybe arguably one of the best in the sport, just made his return against Danny Garcia, which we'll talk about in the next few minutes. But Errol Spence Jr., 188,000 followers. Now, it's clear that when you look at Jake Paul, Logan Paul, these guys, the name, they ring bells. And these kids, this YouTube generation, they care a lot about these guys. They want to see these guys, right? You could argue that Jake Paul stole the show in the Tyson Jones undercard. He stole the show. I mean, even, because we've seen memes of Nate Robinson everywhere. There's a meme of Nate Robinson each and every place you go. Planking, right? Nate on his face. So, and that stole the show. That was popular. People cared about that. People made fun of Nate Robinson for months. Well, not months, weeks, I should say. And people still It's probably to make it. They're probably going to keep making fun of him for months. So the thing is, obviously Mayweather and Logan Paul is not a real fight. It's an exhibition fight. But it's a fight that I think people are going to care about. At this point, it's priced at $25. Now, they did say if it gets to 1 million pay-per-view buys by the time the fight starts or whatnot, the price is going to go up. So it's priced appropriately at this point, $25. Now, if you don't buy it now, it could go up to as much as $70. So at this point, it's priced appropriately. You got two guys who are very popular. Mayweather, obviously, the most popular boxer in this era. And then Logan Paul, one of the more popular people in terms of YouTube, in terms of the YouTube generation. Just in general, Logan Paul is popular. So you put those two guys together, there's a good chance it could do huge numbers, especially at that price point. And here's the thing with boxing. I mean, $75 it took to watch Errol Spence Jr. and Danny Garcia. It's a lot of money. That's not cheap, right? And you consider a pandemic, you consider an economic downturn, you consider all those different things. Well, that is an issue. And I think boxing could have an issue, boxing could have a problem. Boxing has to find a way, and it's a niche sport, but they have to find a way to get their stars out here, right? Boxing in its heyday in the 80s, 70s, they were on TV, primetime TV, people watching boxing. What was it, 93 million watch Muhammad Ali and Leon Spinks? Saw that number out there? I mean, that's a lot of people. It was on ABC. That's a lot of people, right? And so boxing has to find a way to get back into the conscience of the public. To get the people, boxing has to find a way to get people to care about what's going on. It's a bad thing to me. It's a bad thing. It's not a good thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. Let me put it this way. It's not a good thing. Not necessarily say it's a bad thing, but it's not a good thing when you got Tyson Jones, getting more pay-per-view buys than Spence-Garcia. Right? Getting more pay-per-view buys than, really got more pay-per-view buys than Canelo and Triple G. Right? But again, this fight was priced appropriately. A. B. And I just throw that as A, but that's really not A. Obviously, Mike Tyson, the name rings bells and people care about Mike Tyson. We haven't seen Mike Tyson in a ring since 2005, I believe, when he was 38 years old. So we haven't seen Mike Tyson ring almost in 15 years, basically. So that was the intrigue. Getting Mike Tyson back in the ring after 15 years. We saw the videos of Mike Tyson training and everything, broke the internet. Broke it. Snapped the internet. Right? So people care. But boxing has to figure some things out. Maybe price these pay-per-views a little bit more appropriately instead of $74, $49.99. I mean, it's $25 cheaper, and it's reasonable. It's reasonably priced, $50. Bring the prices down. Maybe that's what one direction they need to go. Get off of pay-per-view. Don't put all your big events on pay-per-view. Throw some things on national TV. Do some nationally televised events. I believe that Danny Garcia and Errol Spence Jr. should have been on free TV on Fox, right? Because I think we need people to realize who these guys are just a little bit more. I mean, I don't know how many people know Errol Spence Jr. or Danny Garcia outside of boxing fans, right? And you got some casuals who may know both of those guys, but at the end of the day, there's not enough. You have to appeal to the casual fan. And Triller, what they did, appeal to the casual fan in terms of the music. Snoop, Lil Wayne was supposed to be there. He didn't show. Something happened with him. French Montana was there. People care about these things. And then you added a Paul brother to the undercard. And then it just, at that point, people cared even more. So boxing has to find a way. But it is a situation now where you might see Ryan Garcia against Jake Paul. You might see Tank Davis against Logan Paul. You might see guys who say, you know what? Am I going to fight this dude for this amount of money when I can fight a Paul brother for this amount of money with minimal risk and less chance of me getting hurt? That's a question these guys have to ask themselves. And if the answer is, you know what? I'm in this thing. This is prize fighting. I'm in this thing to make money. I might as well cash out and make as much money as I can and fight one of these Paul guys, right? Let me get my paper, and then maybe I'll fight a tough fight. If you're Ryan Garcia, let me get my paper with a Logan Paul. Heck, and if after I beat Logan, let me get Jake as well. Let me get some paper with these guys. Let me get my money up, and then I'll fight Gervonta Tank Davis, or maybe I'll fight Devin Haney at that point. Maybe I'll fight Teofimo Lopez at that point. But let me get my money first, because we go out and we say, well, it's about legacy, and your name being in a rafters somewhere, your name being in somebody's Hall of Fame somewhere. That stuff is cool and important. But what is that stuff if you're broke, right? What is that stuff if you don't have money, you can't feed yourself? What is that stuff when you have no faculties, when you don't have all your faculties and you're all messed up? It doesn't mean as much, right? So if you have the money and a little bit of legacy, right, you're good. And your faculties to boot, you're good. So if you got your faculties, you can enjoy your money. You can enjoy your money. You can enjoy life. If you don't have your faculties and you don't have no money, that's a double negative, right? But if you have your faculties, you have some few dollars in your pocket, that's a double positive. That's a good situation. So if you're these guys, you have to think about that. And you have to say, can I get in with this dude with minimal risk? Because this is the hurt game. This is the hurt business. And the body only can take so many punches. The face can only take so many punches before, something happens. So it's imperative that these guys get the money, as much money as they can for now. And then with the hope, that, as they go forward, as they get done with the sport, that their faculties are intact and their money is in their pocket and everything is good. But it's not always the case in the sport of boxing. We as fans want, all the big fights. Obviously, I don't want to see Ryan Garcia fight Logan or Jake Paul. I want to see him fight Gervonta Tank Davis. Obviously, I don't want to see Teofimo Lopez fight a Logan or Jake Paul. I want to see him fighting Devin Haney or Ryan Garcia or Tank Davis. That's the fights I want to see. But it's not about what I want to see. It's about what makes the most money, what makes the most financial sense for these guys. And that's something they have to determine. But to me, fighting a Paul brother with minimal risk and still getting paid what you would get paid if you fought Gervonta Davis or Teofimo Lopez or any of those fighters, to me, it makes perfect sense. Get your paper. Because, championship, like I said, winning championships is good, winning rings is good, in all these different sports. But if you have no money, what does it mean? It means nothing. You're just broke. You're just a broke legend. And I don't think that's much. I don't think that's great. I'd rather be a guy who's a somewhat of a legend with my pockets filled than a broke legend. Who wants to be a broke legend? Nobody wants to be a broke legend, right? All right. Let's switch gears now. Well, we're staying in boxing, but let's switch gears to what we saw last Saturday night in Texas, Dallas, Texas. Errol Spence Jr., Danny Garcia. Spence is back. And he showed that last week against Danny Garcia. He is back. And he fought a good fight. Used his jab effectively. Did a great job. Fought very well. I think there was some ring rust with Errol Spence, which is understandable being out of the ring since last September. So out of the ring since last September, a vicious, a brutal, a horrible car accident, and you're back in the ring and you're still fighting at an elite level. I was impressed by Errol Spence Jr. I didn't think he was going to do what he did. But at the same time, I'm not shocked nor am I surprised. I just didn't expect it. But I also look at it from this standpoint, give Errol Spence a lot of credit. He fought his way back. I mean, him falling from that, or being ejected from the car and still back and looking the same. It's impressive, man. That's something to be said about a guy who gets ejected from a car and comes back and has, really didn't miss a beat. He's back. And he was able to recover from the accident. And obviously it's a miracle. A miracle from God that Errol Spence Jr. is here today. Looking at that accident, looking at that car, and looking at what transpired, he has no business being on this earth today. None. But he found a way, man. God found a way to save this dude. And now he's back in the ring, getting punched in the face again after all that, right? And now, getting punched in the face and winning. He dominated Danny Garcia. Here's one thing, and it was a close 10 rounds to 2 fight. It was a close 9-3 fight, 9 rounds to 3 fight. But at the same time, it was a dominant performance. We knew when the bell rang at the end of the 12th round who was the winner of the fight. And it was clear. And you look at fights in the past with Danny Garcia, no one does that to Danny Garcia. Sean Porter didn't do that to Danny Garcia. When the bell ended round 12, we were confused and not necessarily didn't know who was going to win that fight. Porter ultimately won it. I thought Danny Garcia deserved a draw. When the bell rang in round 12 with Thurman against Garcia, again, we weren't sure who was going to win the fight. But when the bell rang at the end of the fight between Garcia and Errol Spence Jr., you knew it was clear. You knew it was decisive. You knew that Errol Spence Jr. was back. What's next for Errol? I mean, obviously, to me, the fight that's out there is Terrence Crawford. And we'll see what happens with the whole situation with Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford's contract with Top Rank reportedly is up at the end of the year, October 2021, according to some reports. So at that point in time, well, if they can't make the fight between Crawford and Spence, at this point with Crawford being with Top Rank and Spence being with PBC, maybe we'll get it at the end of 2021 when we have the situation where Crawford maybe signs with PBC. He was at the fight. We never really see Crawford. We don't see Crawford at PBC fights. So he was at a PBC fight. He was there in the building at a PBC fight, at a PBC event. We usually don't see that. So that could be a sign. Andre Berger tweeted that out. Could be a sign that maybe Terrence Crawford is coming on over to PBC and Al Heyman, which again would make the fight easy to make. A fight I really would like to see Spence fight, and is Keith Thurman. I think that'd be a fun fight. Keith Thurman, Errol Spence Jr., I think that's fun. And I would like to see it. I hope to see it. I know Spence has said he really doesn't want to fight Keith Thurman anymore. But, money talks. And Thurman's one of the more popular names in this sport. His name rings bells a little bit. I wonder if that fight would do better than Spence Crawford. Not sure, but I think it would be close. I know Pacquiao Thurman did $500,000, but you also look at Manny Pacquiao in that name. Now, there's also talk that Spence could fight Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao is allegedly, supposedly, reportedly interested in fighting Errol Spence Jr. So that's a fight that we might see. And, Manny Pacquiao, man, the guy doesn't scare easily. And this dude is willing to go up against a bigger welterweight than Errol Spence. I mean, Manny Pacquiao's not a big dude. And he's going around knocking down big guys. Beat up Antonio Margarito, big dude. Beat up Miguel Cotto, a big dude. Pacquiao's beat up some big guys. Keith Thurman's a bigger welterweight. Beat him up. Right? He didn't beat him up, but he beat him. He beat up Margarito. He beat up Cotto. He didn't beat up Keith Thurman. I know he's a little older. He was a little older at the time when he fought Thurman. But he didn't beat him up. And it was a close fight. So what Manny Pacquiao does, and maybe, in terms of financial, that's the biggest fight I think Spence can get. I think that's bigger than Crawford. Manny's one of the few boxers that Manny has. A lot of people know who Manny Pacquiao is. Casuals know who Manny Pacquiao is. Not many casuals, you could argue, know who really. I mean, they may have heard the name Terrence Crawford. They may have heard the name Spence, but it doesn't ring a bell the way Pacquiao's name does. It doesn't. So that's going to be something interesting moving forward to see what happens with Spence. But he's back, and he beat the car accident. You know, he's back. He's in the ring. He's successful. He looked decent. He was solid. There was some rust, but that's expected. That's understandable. But he was solid, and he beat Danny Garcia. What's next for Danny Garcia? I mean, Danny Garcia's lost the 3 biggest fights of his welterweight career, whether it was Keith Thurman, whether it was Sean Porter, and now Errol Spence. So what's next for Danny Garcia? I mean, I still think Danny Garcia, you can still make a big fight with Danny Garcia, and I think Danny Garcia still could beat any welterweight in boxing. I really do. I still think he could do that. Maybe he goes up to 154. There was talk that Garcia was interested in going up at 154 at some point in time. So maybe he decides that enough at 147. Let me go up to 154. And there's a lot of options at 154. A lot of options at 154 with PPC. Tony Harrison, Erickson Lubin, Jamel Charlo, Jason Rosario. There's a lot of options at 154. Jarrett Hurd. A lot of options at 154. So if Danny Garcia decided to move up, he's another name you can add to the 154-pound mix. And that's a big-time division with a lot of big-time fights that could be made for Danny Garcia. So that might be the direction he goes. I'm not saying he goes that direction, but there was talk. I know Angel and those guys, Angel Garcia, Danny Garcia's dad and trainer, there was talk years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe last year it was, that Danny Garcia was interested in going up to 154. So maybe this is the time, the moment that he decides to make that decision, take the plunge and decides to go to 154. So again, there's plenty of fights there, which means there's plenty of money there. So that might be something that Danny Garcia decides to do. Or maybe Danny Garcia decides to fight a Paul brother. Maybe he decides to fight a Logan or a Jake Paul and try to get some of that Paul brother money, because there's a lot of money with those Paul brothers. Minimal risk, a lot of money to be made for Danny Garcia. But, you know, it was a moment. I think Danny had an opportunity in this fight. I did. You know, Danny's a counterpuncher. And so he doesn't lead. He follows. So, and there was times maybe if Danny just, every time that spins through, like his dad said, Angel said after the fight, every time he throws, you got to throw. You got to counter what he's throwing. And if Danny would have did that just a little bit more, maybe at a moment, an opportunity and a chance. Who knows? But Danny didn't do it. And you know, I got to ask this question when it comes to Danny Garcia. You know, like I said, he lost to all the big names at 147 in terms of Spence, in terms of Porter, in terms of Thurman. And does Danny have that next level, that greatness that it takes to win those type of 50-50 fights? Does he have that in him? And that's a question, seemed to have it in him at 140 in terms of Amir Khan, where Khan was outboxing the first couple rounds. Danny caught him. The rest is history. He seemed to have it against Lucas Matisse. Matisse was a guy that a lot of people were avoiding at 140. Danny went up. Danny went there and did what he had to do against Lucas Matisse. But he goes up to 147, and I don't know if he doesn't have that next gear. I don't know. I thought Porter was a draw. I thought Thurman beat him 7-5, but you could say 7-5 both ways, But Errol Spence beat him clearly. It was clear Errol Spence Jr. was the better fighter on that particular night. So you wonder what Danny is. Danny one of these guys who's just very good, but doesn't have that next level mental to be great. And that is something that, that's a question we have to ask when it comes to Danny Garcia. Does he have what it takes to go to that next level, that great level, that level that requires you to step out of yourself, that level that requires you to do a lot of things that you're uncomfortable doing? Does Danny have it? And that's a question we have to ask. And I don't necessarily know if he does, because here's the thing. If he ups the pressure against Errol Spence, just maybe, he wins the fight. I know Spence dominated, but I thought that fight was there for Danny. If he just was a little bit more active, like his father said, if he just had a little bit more activity. And again, his father felt like, you know what? This fight's on Danny. Danny didn't do what he was supposed to do. If Danny does what he's supposed to do, Danny wins the fight according to Angel. And I think Angel could be right on some level. Danny just needed to throw more, and he didn't throw enough to win the fight. You got to, in those 50-50 fights, you got to sell out. You got to do what you got to do to win it. And that requires you, again, to take that next step and get uncomfortable. Danny, being a counterpuncher is comfortable. Sometimes you got to lead when you're in that situation. Sometimes you got to lead. You got to step out of yourself. Danny didn't do it against Spence, and it cost him the fight. But again, there's a lot of great fights to be made for both of these guys moving forward. Maybe you throw Danny Garcia to Terrence Crawford. I don't know. Maybe. Maybe you let Danny Garcia cross the street and fight Terrence Crawford. Who knows? But we'll see what happens. We got a few more minutes left before we get out of here. I got to talk about Adrian Broner. Very disappointing. Not disappointing, but Adrian Broner is having a rough time of it. A lot of civil suits out there when it comes to AB. And, it's been a struggle for this guy. Obviously he has a civil suit out there in Ohio where he owes this woman X amount of money, allegedly sexually assaulted a woman in a club. Ultimately, they decided on a civil suit. And ultimately, you look at the situation, and AB had to pay X amount of money, right? Now you look at the situation, and Broner has another civil suit out there in Las Vegas for $4 million that he has to pay. And so, it's a tough situation for Adrian. And Adrian allegedly, supposedly has a fight coming up in January. Now that fight may be a no-go at this point. So, it's who knows? But Adrian Broner, you feel sorry for the guy because he keeps getting in his own way. He can't get right. And the reality of it is, he has only so many fights left. And also you look at it, Adrian Broner, when he stepped up against big-time competitions, always lost. Whether it's Marcos Maidana, whether it's Mikey Garcia, whether it's Sean Porter. Every time Manny Pacquiao, every time he stepped up in terms of competition, it's always ended him losing, right? So Adrian Broner, as popular as he is, right, every time he steps up, he loses. And so AB has to find a way. I don't even know we don't even know how good is Adrian Broner at this point. How good was Adrian Broner? We were talking about him as being the next Mayweather. How good is he? Obviously, he's not Mayweather. That was clear after he lost to Marcos Maidana. He's not Mayweather. You could argue it was clear when he fought Paulie Malignaggi. He won a very close decision. He's not Mayweather. He wasn't Mayweather. But I do believe if he was moved, maybe it was too much him jumping to welterweight. And I know why he jumped to welterweight, because it was the best opportunity for him to get a big-time fight. But he was at his best at 135 when he beat Antonio DeMarco. That was Broner at his best. Now this guy, he went up to 147, lost to Maidana. And that 140 wasn't successful there in terms of the big names. And now, where is he? He's popular. People care about him. But he's having a hard time getting right outside the ring. And, all these different civil suits, Adrian Broner is going to be in red. And he's going to be fighting just to get out of these civil suits and to pay all these civil suits. That's all he's going to be fighting for, just to clear up these suits. Clear up all these civil suits. That's what Adrian Broner is going to be fighting for at this point. And there's something out there, I think was a juror. Not a juror, but, he's some jewelry he bought. I believe it's in New York City, where Adrian Broner, again, owed some guy allegedly some money. And, he civil suit out there, possibly with that as well. So Broner is a guy that I'm concerned about. I'm truly concerned about Adrian Broner. And I hope that he can stay right. I'm hoping that he can stay safe. There's been a couple times on Instagram where you got worried that maybe this guy was about to do something to himself, harm himself in a negative way, and do something that would be, catastrophic, would be awful. But you don't know, and it has to be some concern. The man has made a decent amount of money, and he doesn't really have much to show for it. There's nothing at this point. Lost all his money. Can't pay $800,000 in a civil suit. Can't pay it. Doesn't have the money. Has to wait to fight to get money. Sad, man. It's a sad situation. And it didn't have to be this way when it came to Adrian Broner. Adrian Broner could have been the biggest face in boxing at this point. Could have been. Could have been. If Adrian Broner was undefeated at this point, my goodness. This dude would be the cash cow of the sport. He would be the he would be the cash cow and one of the cash cows in the sport. For sure. He was that popular. I think he's still popular. When Adrian Broner returns, whenever he returns, people are going to care. People are going to watch. But I'm just hoping I'm just hoping he can get to the ring. And I'm hoping he can make a decent amount of money where he can clean up his debt and, just get himself back, get himself whole. We'll see what happens with Broner, but it is concerning what's going on with him and all these different civil suits and his financial situation. I want to thank everybody for listening. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. Make sure you like us on Facebook. Make sure you like this live here. Make sure you like it. Like it, press the like button, push it, and keep pushing it. Push the subscribe button and come on back with us next week as we talk sports and have a little fun doing it. For everybody here, go for it. We hope you have a great weekend. See you later. Take care.